It's the first episode of the school's new podcast, and today I'm talking to Guy Ayling, headmaster at the school. Let's get into it right now.
Welcome to Mount Kelly Conversations, the podcast from Mount Kelly in Devon. In each episode, we have conversations with pupils, with staff, and with other people in the school community to find out more about life at the school. Come with us now as we get right into this episode.
Guy, good morning, and welcome to the first episode of the school podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Simon. It's drizzly a bit outside, but never dampens my spirits.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear. I must ask you, first of all, have you ever been on a podcast before?
I've never been on a podcast, but I'm always willing to challenge myself and learn new skills. I think that's what the 21st century demands of us, and it's what we demand of our pupils. So I've got to role model that, but it's very exciting to be here.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, it's great to have you on here, and it feels like a real privilege to talk to you, actually. And I'm sure that for the people who are listening to this right now, they're probably thinking about what's going to be coming up in future episodes. And of course, you yourself probably don't have that whole plan of the first 10 episodes listed out or anything. However, just a quick question for you. Why did you feel it was important for the school to have a podcast in the first place?
Well, firstly, I will say you're quite right. I don't really have a plan. I do like to see things evolve, and we'll see how they go and what seems to be important and enjoyable as we go along. But I think it's important because it's the way of the world. It's perhaps the way in which we have to connect with people. People do like podcasts. They do like to listen to discussions and conversations and so on. And we as schools, obviously with an imperative to get our message across, need to embrace these new and funky and challenging channels of communication, which makes it exciting for us and hopefully makes our communication more effective.
Okay, let's bring it back to yourself then for a moment, Guy. Tell me a little bit about how you got into working in education in the first place. What was the pull for you? What was the draw?
Well, both my parents were teachers in the comprehensive system in inner city Birmingham in the 60s, 70s and 80s. So I was born into that. And I think my first realisation that I was the son of teachers was the fact that we could spend long summer holidays together, which was wonderful. But my first inkling really was quite young. I think I was about 8 or 9 at school, and I saw my Latin master's mark book, and I was intrigued by the order, the way he used colours to determine different features of our work and so on. And I thought, I really want one of those. And then I soon realised that if I wanted one of those, I needed to be a teacher. So I never really thought about anything else, and I sort of glided, if you like, into teaching. It was sort of an effortless decision in that respect, and I loved it. I mean, my first experience of teaching was on the JET program, the Japan Teaching Exchange program in Japan,
that. Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And I had 3 years working in really nice schools with really nice people doing something that I really enjoyed, and I thought, well, I could actually make a career of this, and I've been very happy in it, and I might be in, if you like, in the twilight years of my career. I've still got plenty to offer, I hope, but I look back and I think I wouldn't change a thing.
Gosh, I certainly wouldn't say you're in your twilight years at all, Guy. You look far too young for that. For the sake of anyone listening, of course, we, Guy and I, are looking at each other, but we're recording this online. So tell me a bit then about the first schools that you worked in.
Well, the first schools were the Japanese schools. I worked in a board of education in a really small town in northern Japan, completely unlike the stereotype of Japan. It was a huge town in terms of area, but it only had 5,000 or 6,000 people in it, and I worked in the junior high school there a couple of days a week, and then 3 days a week I was spread across the 6 elementary schools in the town. And in the main bit of the populated area, the school had about 200 kids in it, and then as we drove up the valley into the mountains, the furthest school away from the sort of centre of the town only had 3 children in it, because in Japan, primary level education stipulates that children must be able to walk to school. So even the most isolated hamlets have their own school.
Oh, I see. Gosh.
And so I worked in a school with 3 children. It was wonderful. They were 3 sisters as well. They were called, they were the Suzuki sisters. And I remember when my Japanese got good enough to have a conversation with the head teacher, I looked out across the playing fields where the groundsman was putting out a running track with 3 lanes on it, and I said to her, well, you'll only need 2 because the oldest Suzuki sister's going up to the junior high school next year. And she said, no, we still need the 3rd lane because the 4th sister is arriving next year. That was a wonderful experience in Japan. And I just, that really made me determined to be a teacher. I loved being with young people and sharing my knowledge and learning things from them as well. And that sort of reciprocal nature of the educational process is truly wonderful. And I came back to England and then went to a boarding school up in the north, Sedbergh, stayed there for 15 years, was very happy there. And that really sort of set me on my career of being a teacher and a schoolmaster, if you want to use some old parlance, and I've been very happy doing it.
Guy, how do you feel it changed you as a person, spending time living overseas, working overseas in a completely different culture? I mean, this isn't like, being in somewhere in Europe where there are differences to the UK, of course, but culturally we are similar in many ways as well. But Japan is very different, isn't it?
It's totally different, although you do find similarities eventually, but you are hit by a wall of difference. I remember the first time I went to the local store, I wanted to buy some sugar for my tea, and I'd very wisely brought my own tea bags with me. I just needed some sugar, and I thought that all the packaging was completely different. And of course, in my early days, I couldn't read any Japanese at all, and I thought, well, I'll just pick something that looks like sugar, because sugar comes in the same type of packets worldwide, surely. And I picked my sugar, got a slightly strange look from the cashier as I paid, and then went home and opened it up, and it was laxative, which I didn't. Don't ask me how I found that out, but I mean that sort of to me emphasises. I know it's just sort of slightly cute story and a bit ridiculous, but it's all of your cultural, clearly linguistic, culinary, all of your touchstones are completely removed. And I think it was a wonderful experience to be in that position, and I knew people who were in that position who kind of closed in on it and said, well, I'm going to try and make the Japanese like me. And I just thought, okay, I'm quite up for this. I'm going to eat everything they put in front of me, and I'm going to turn up to all the things they invite me to. I'm going to be jolly and cheerful, the cheerful Englishman, so to speak. And that was a wonderful experience, and it taught me a great deal about openness. It taught me a lot about loneliness as well, to a certain extent. And I don't think I was lonely in Japan, but I kind of understood very quickly what it's like to be an outsider. And that's helped me particularly understand and empathise with our boarders who come from overseas. You know, when all of their touchstones or reference points change, it's hugely disorientating, and I absolutely get that. But come back, the differences, you talked about the differences, Simon. The Japanese are, yes, they are quite reserved when you meet them and so on, but when you sort of embed yourself in their communities and you are open and you get to know them, they're fantastically warm, very generous, and they have a very similar sense of humour to the British. They like wordplay, they like irony, and so on. And once I'd mastered the language and the local dialect enough to have proper conversations with them, we had some right laughs. But I will finish with one small story. I'd been there 2.5 years, and I was with people with whom I was really, really friendly, and they were discussing something that was going on in the village, some sort of political issue. I don't really know what it was. And I said, I spoke good Japanese, and I said, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. And they said, you won't understand. You're not Japanese.
Oh,
so there is difference. Yeah. There are similarities, but there's fundamental difference. But we celebrate that and enjoy it, and I can assure you I enjoyed it.
And very different to life in Tavistock in Devon, of course, I imagine. But tell me something about the school, because of course it's kind of it is everything, in the sense that it's for children from 4 to 18, I think, and it's day students and weekly and full boarding. And it's co-educational, so it's boys and girls. So it's kind of ticking many boxes. But I mean, without selling the school to me, tell me something about the school.
You're absolutely right, Simon, to say we tick a lot of boxes. And of course, that's a danger in some schools, that you try to be all things to all people. And we are, in terms of our, unashamedly so, in terms of our inclusivity and the fact that we're day boarding, boy, girl, and so on and so forth. But we're also aware that we do need to pin our colours to certain masts, And like many schools, we try to be academically rigorous and stretch the children, both in the classroom and on the playing field and all of those types of things. But we do have some interesting, I think, aspects of uniqueness that do set us apart in a world in which we're trying to be all things to all people. We have outstanding swimming provision and girls football, for example, amongst many very well delivered sport. We stand toe to toe with anybody on those two activities. But I think something that all the children can access, and they do, and we encourage them to do that, is the beauty of our location and the opportunities of our location. We're right on the edge of Dartmoor. We have a fantastic outdoor education programme. We have really impressive conversion rates from bronze to silver to gold. D&V, for example, 10 tours, Devizes to Westminster, canoeing and all of those types of things. We really like to get kids out where they can experience the hardship of Dartmoor, not just the beauty of it. And that duality, I think, does impact on our children. The fact that Dartmoor can be sunny in the morning and very rainy in the afternoon. I think there's a duality as a result in our pupils. They can be very kind and very charming, but when they need to show grit and a competitive spirit, perhaps they've got that in proper measures. Getting outside, of course, is hugely important, and we're understanding a lot more about how important it is, and we're seeking to, we're actually looking at this formally in partnership with some universities. We're looking very closely at our data to try and see a connection between the time that we spend outside and particularly exposure to nature, the connection between that and well-being, which I think is fairly well established already, but then also to make that connection between nature, well-being and academic attainment. And some of our data suggests that there's some real causal links there, and that really just gives us the confidence and the conviction to get our kids out more.
It's refreshing to hear, and I think that any parent, whether current parent or a parent who's looking around for a school right now, would appreciate hearing that at school it's not a case of leaving children to stare at screens, but actually getting them out and to experience that grit that you talk about on Dartmoor. How do you feel that showing grit to children, like exposing them to that, helps them later in life as well?
Well, as we know, Simon, life's full of challenges, and I think everybody who listens to this will be living or have lived considerable challenges in their lives, and those challenges shouldn't define us. It's how we respond to them, and one can be one can close in on oneself if overwhelmed, and clearly some challenges are overwhelming, or we learn to bounce back. It doesn't matter if we're hitting the floor, it's about how high we bounce back. And I think giving children exposure to challenges in which they fail helps them understand the process. In other words, there is a process within which failure or challenge is a part. It's not an end. There's always life beyond it. And there are ways of finding our way through these challenging times to become well-balanced, happy individuals. I would though, an antithesis to this, Simon, is of course, I am very concerned that we overplay the importance of resilience, and by that I mean we enforce it as an end in itself. I'm very worried that we certainly don't do this at Mount Kelly, but we kind of think you've got to be resilient, and anything less than resilience is a weakness. But of course, I think a form of resilience can be deciding not to continue to smash your head against a brick wall, and making gentle U-turns or changes in your plans and approaches is a form of resilience. And we shouldn't necessarily say that painful resilience is always the answer. It's just one of many tools to consider as we tackle life's challenges.
One of many tools. I like that. I really do. Guy, earlier in this recording, you mentioned boarding very briefly. Tell us a little bit about how it looks at Mount Kelly.
I mean, our boarding is full, and that's very nice. There aren't many spare beds, and there might be good reasons for that, but I think that engenders this feeling amongst our boarding community that it is a vibrant community in and of itself, and it demands certain attentions in the sense that we have a lot of boarders and we need to do boarding very well for the children in our care. So we have We have a prep boarding house, and we have 4 college senior boarding houses. Our houses are organised in a vertical system, so children from years 9 to 13, which I think is the best way of doing it. It provides all sorts of opportunities for leadership for the older pupils and allows us to have meaningful house competitions. And we try to create very homely environments. Our houses are all extremely well led by fantastically caring and committed staff. And we try ultimately to keep the children busy in boarding at the weekends, but also recognise the fact they need rest. They need to sort of sharpen their tools, if you like, for Monday morning. But we first and foremost see ourselves as a boarding school, not as a day school with boarding as an adjunct, and we don't really pay much attention to our boarders after 6 o'clock when the day pupils have gone home. It's a vibrant community. They have their own programme. And I think they're cared for really well. And boarding should be something, I think, having boarded myself, so I understand, for 11 years, actually. I know the crunchy and the smooth when it comes to boarding, and it's not always smooth running, but we want it to be transformational experience. We want the children, I really want the children to not only learn independence, which they think is what they learn when they come to boarding, but learn interdependence. In other words, that ability to create a network of support to which they contribute and from which they draw great strength. And I think that those lessons interdependence are extremely valuable for life beyond school, because as John Donne told us, no man is an island.
And I imagine that parents know that their children are, and they're reassured that their children are kept busy and occupied whenever they are there in the boarding house. But what actually happens during the weekend? What does a weekend look like? That sort of weekend that the parent might not know so much about, maybe because they don't get such detailed feedback from their children.
Yeah, which is often the case. They either get too much or too little. We like to put on a lot of activities for the boarders and the day pupils actually on the Saturday, some of which is very structured, organised and almost compulsory. Team sports, for example, they may not be compulsory, but if you're picked for a team, you have indicated that you would like to be picked for a team and you play. So we have lots of sport on a Saturday, and that can take the pupils all over the southwest of England and beyond in some cases. So Saturday's pretty much taken care of. We don't have academic lessons in the morning, but we do a lot of sport. A lot of outdoor ed will happen over the weekend, of course. You know, some pupils are away all Saturday and Sunday and then back into classes on Monday if they're doing DV or something like that. And then at Saturday evening, Sunday, we do have a programme of activities and trips. So there can be anything from Christmas shopping in Exeter to surfing in North Cornwall to cinema trips, paintballing, that type of thing. And that can run on a Saturday evening or a Sunday. But those activities are, we encourage them to take part, of course, and we hope that there are good reasons if they choose not to. But, one of those good reasons is the fact that they're knackered and they need a rest, because we work them hard Monday to Friday naturally, and of course many of our pupils are very capable athletes. Our swimmers, for example, are training sometimes from 5:30 in the morning and in the evening also, as are our other sportsmen and women. They're doing all sorts of things, so they do need rest. I think that's a really important thing, something that probably, Simon, you and I have understood more and more as we've aged.
As we get a little bit older. Yes,
absolutely.
And we often hear about how important it is for things like extracurricular activities, especially when it comes to helping with academic studies in order to increase focus. I'd love to know your thoughts on this sort of thing.
Absolutely. I think I've always heard the argument as both a teacher and as a head that, we need to get the kids back into the classroom more often. If we could teach them for another hour a day, we'd get better results. And I do think you hit a point of diminishing returns. I know my own children, for example, I've got 3 boys and they're all quite different, but they all love their sports. I know that an extra hour in the class would do no good for them whatsoever. There's almost a finite amount of learning that some children can do. They need to get outside. They need to blow out the cobwebs. They need to be healthy. We know all about physical and mental health and how important exercise and being outside is important for that. And we genuinely believe that that type of balance will actually improve attainment rather than academic attainment, rather than having extra contact time in the class. And let's face it, academic results are hugely important for you to take the next step, be that GCSE to A-level or A-level to university and into your first job, of course. But it's once you get that job, you probably won't be promoted because of the academic results you've got in the past. You'll be promoted because of, frankly, the type of person you are and also the skills that you bring to the team, not just intellectual expertise in your particular discipline, but that ability to collaborate, to work as a team, to be empathetic, to be compassionate and courageous, and all of these types of things, which I think all independent schools inculcate really well. And one of the ways we do it, along with lots of other schools, is to have a really robust, exciting, enriching co-curricular and sporting program. So actually, we're not doing it because we can't get them back into the classes. We're doing it because it's a very, very important development of their skills as young people.
And talking of young people, you mentioned that you have 3 boys. I imagine then that you find that when you're not at work, so to speak, you're still kind of at work. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, I'm very lucky to have. We're very close as a family. We're really strong unit, and we really enjoy spending time with each other. And I actually met my wife in Japan. She's American. She was sitting next to me on a train, and I was really hungry, and I noticed she hadn't eaten a packed lunch, and I leant over and asked if I could have it, and turns out to have been one of the most expensive packed lunches I cadged off somebody. But we have 3 boys. Interestingly, we've always lived in school accommodation. My boys have always had me as their headmaster, and I think they've grown up and accepted that and been very comfortable with it. But in terms of when I go home, I don't really talk to the boys about school because they feel it's not really their dad who's asking them, it's their headmaster. I might talk to them about sport. That's fine. And if I need to know anything about what's going on in the classroom, of course, I've got a direct line to their teachers.
Yeah. No, it could be handy for sure, I imagine. And Guy, before we hit record on this podcast, you mentioned to me, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you mentioned or you indicated or hinted at a slight love of 80s techno music. If I picked up your phone and looked at your Spotify playlist or your Apple Music or whatever it is that you listen to, what would be the last song that you played on there?
Actually, it was only this morning. I think it was Sometimes by Erasure.
Oh, that really is 80s techno then, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm proper hardcore. I'm a big Vince Clarke fan, actually. I mean, I think he's one of... I think we throw the word genius around a little bit too much. I mean, Vince Clarke, for me, with his contribution through Depeche Mode, Yazoo and Erasure and a lot of other stuff he's written for other people, I think he's as close to an 80s genius as there might be. But if you do look at my mobile phone, I mean, as a chronology, you will find all my artists basically existed before 1989, and I think it's not good for me. I need to sort of branch out in the way that I am with this podcast and listen to other music. But I'm still finding fantastic 80s music, which I'm enjoying.
And I imagine that some of the people listening to this right now share a love of 80s music. If I ask some of your favourite bands from the 80s, what would you say? Well,
I mentioned Erasure. I really like Big Country.
Okay. You mentioned Depeche Mode as well, so I'm going to guess.
Yeah, Depeche Mode, Soft Cell. I love some of the German stuff, Kraftwerk, Alphaville. Haven't yet got into Rammstein, that German band, but that's a slightly different genre of music. So all sorts of stuff. I love some of the really poppy stuff. I was at a festival this summer and I saw Tiffany play.
Oh, right.
Which was just an absolute fantastic experience. Yeah. Roland Gift from the Fine Young Cannibals.
Oh, yeah.
I love all of that type of stuff as well. Plus some of the, slightly less well-known 80s stuff, The Farm, Don't Mind Bad Manners, that type of stuff. So I love it, and I go to festivals and make a fool of myself dancing like a dad.
Fantastic. I'm sure that your boys are right there running away from you whenever you're doing that.
Absolutely.
Guy, I'm keeping an eye on time. We do need to bring this to a close in a moment. If anyone's heard anything here and they wanted to get in touch with you, maybe to connect with you a little bit more, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, I'm very open with my email. I love parents and pupils emailing me directly, so that's very simple. That's headmaster@mountkelly.com. But of course, all of the other ways of connecting with us are on our website, and very happy to engage and talk more about the things that we do.
Excellent. Well, we'll put a link to your email in the show notes for this episode, along with a link for the school website, just in case anybody doesn't know it. But in the meantime, Guy Ayling, thank you very much for joining us here on the first episode of the school's new podcast.
Thank you very much, Simon.